Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a compassionate and insightful 20-year-old son, Joey, who is working hard to launch as an adult. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. So listeners, when you hear the word mother, what thoughts and feelings come to you? If you're impacted by adoption, you likely have a variety of mixed feelings about mothering. Well, today's guest, Rebecca Wellington, is an adoptee, a mom, and a historian who has thought extensively about this topic of motherhood for the last several years. Her new book, Who is a Worthy Mother, is a hybrid, part memoir and part adoption history, and it's a really great book. I highly recommend you read it. She uses her own family story, her own experience as an adoptee and as a mother, and her adopted sister's struggles with addiction and more to frame a larger conversation about adoption in the U.S. Her book is timely as Roe versus Wade has been overturned and there's more focus on women's bodily autonomy. Who does our culture deem to be worthy mothers? So welcome to Unraveling Adoption, Becca. We're glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Beth. I'm really excited to be part of your awesome podcast.
Thank you. And I was so thrilled to meet you in person at Untangling Our Roots, the summit in Denver a couple of weeks ago. So it's great to actually touch base with people in person. It feels way different.
Yeah, that was amazing. At the summit, I met a number of people who I only had relationships with through Instagram and LinkedIn. It was like, oh, wow.
I know.
Mostly it's like, oh, this is how tall you are. That's the big takeaway.
I know. You're like, whoa, I didn't realize you were so tall. Yeah, I've had that with a few people too. Was that your first big gathering of adoption type people?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was overwhelming.
Yeah. I was going to say, was it overwhelming? Yes. My first one was really overwhelming, but great, but overwhelming. So it's like so much emotion, so much complexity, just like my introduction. We're delving into adoption's complexities. Yeah. None of this is simple. That's for sure.
No.
Well, before we dig into the contents of your wonderful book, why don't you just give us a brief background of your adoption story? I always like to elevate adoptees' stories as much as I can.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. So I was born June 29, 1975. So I'm almost 49.
It's almost your birthday. 49 and holding, right?
49 and holding. Yeah. Yeah. So in 1975, which is a really interesting moment for our nation with adoption. I get into that with the history. But, for most of my life, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. I was born and then in this kind of horrific holding pattern for 2 days at the hospital I was born in Northridge, California, which is LA County. At the time, state law said there had to be a waiting period after the birth before the adoptive parents come. So my birth mother gave birth to me. She left. And then I was there in the hospital for 2 days. And then my adoptive parents came and picked me up. So that wasn't good practice.
No. So for 2 days, you just had no one.
No, I had no one. I didn't have a name. Yeah. I mean, I was in like a nursery. So what we know now about infants and infants' needs. And so that was not a good start. And then I was adopted by my family. They had already adopted my older sister, who's 2 years older than me, different birth mother, but also in the state of California. My older sister was born in 1973. So we're 21, 22 months apart.
Okay.
And growing up, my sister and I always knew we were adopted, but I love to cite Angela Tucker's great book, You Should Be Grateful. I mean, I think there was definitely a narrative of you're adopted, you were saved, your birth mothers didn't want you. They, especially with my sister, there was a lot of narratives around her birth mother being dysfunctional and messed up. She was young. And so the narrative was, you were saved by us. And in the book, I talk about sort of living this weird liminal fantasy where I was like, oh, I'm so lucky, and I was lucky. My parents were loving and they had a lot of resources. I grew up a pretty amazing life. But at the same time, we didn't really talk about adoption. That's why I'm just so blown away by what you do with Unraveling Adoption. That just was not in the repertoire.
Okay.
It happened. You're lucky.
Yeah. It was like a one-time event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was pretty common for the time, right? That was kind of the milieu that you were raised in. That
Absolutely.
That was a culture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't question it. I thought briefly about doing a search after I graduated college. And that was literally the first time I learned that my birth certificate was under lock and seal by the state of California. So I didn't really even know that until I was 22. And I was like, sort of toying with this idea of doing a search. You know, I just graduated college, trying to figure out my identity. That's a really big moment of growth.
Yeah.
And that wall was just shut in my face. And so I just kind of moved on. I was like, I'd have to get a court order and hire a private investigator to get my birth certificate. I can't deal with that. I'm 22.
Yeah, right. 22-year-olds don't do that.
Yeah. And then again, I just sort of went along with my life, but in the fog, like people talk about, and somewhat dysfunctional. Looking back, I'm like, wow, I was just like coping, you know?
What did that look like?
So the amazing book, 7 Core Issues of Adoption.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Such an amazing primer. They write about these 2 kind of archetypes of adoptees. Like there's the one who wants to assimilate and please the parents. And, you know, this was good. I'm a good purchase. I'm not a mistake. I was a mistake for my birth mother. I'm not a mistake for you. That was me.
Yeah. It's like, don't give me back.
Yeah. And my sister was like the opposite. She was just like, this shit is fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to burn this down.
Yeah.
I don't fit in. You don't see me. You don't understand me. From the age of 12, she just was on fire. And the family narrative was, oh, her birth mother, who was 14 at the time of her birth, we think, although now I understand historically, the practice, especially in the early and mid 70s, was just saturated with lies.
Yeah, you never know.
So everything I thought I knew, it all could be lies. Anyway, the story was, oh, her birth mother was 14, my sister's birth mother. She must have been a drug addict. She must have been a train wreck. This explains why your sister is a train wreck and an addict. So it was all just lumped onto her birth mother, who we know nothing about.
Yeah, just blame the birth mother.
Blame the birth mother.
Yeah, that's very easy. And as adoptive parents, I see that all the time. Oh, it's the genes. It's nothing I did.
Yeah.
It's nothing about me, even though they spend their whole life with the adoptive parents. It's easy to blame the birth parents, and we need to quit doing that.
Yeah.
For sure.
So growing up, it was a roller coaster and it was difficult. And my sister was in and out of rehabs and behavioral centers as a teenager. And I think some of those places were not good places.
Yeah, definitely.
And I describe in the book, it wasn't until I had my own children that I really started to question everything. Becoming a mother rocked everything, the fragile foundation upon which I sat my whole life until the birth of my 2 daughters. And then 5 years after my second daughter was born, my sister died of a drug overdose. And that was it.
I'm so sorry. Oh, that's brutal. That's so hard.
Yeah.
I've heard that from so many, especially from women adoptees, when they have their own child and hold them in their arms, they're like, how could anyone give this away? I don't understand. And it's like this very big whiplash. I think it happens to men too, but not quite probably as deeply biologically. Yeah. But yeah, that must have really been distressing. I mean, wonderful when you had your child, you're like, yay. And
yeah.
It must have been really tough to deal with all those feelings.
Yeah. And after my first daughter was born, I'd had an emergency C-section. So I was just full of drugs and my body was in crisis. And then my head was in crisis. Aside from, I think now I understand my birth and my relinquishment. Relinquishment is traumatic. Yes. I think that was the second most traumatic thing I experienced.
And at the time of your daughter's birth, did you have people around you that understood that you were having adoption trauma happen? No. Did they even, did your doctor even know you were adopted? No. Did they have that on their radar? No.
Yeah. That's what's amazing, Beth. I didn't even come into this awareness of this word adoption trauma until I started writing this book in 2020.
Wow.
Nobody talked about it. That wasn't a thing in my world.
Sure. Yeah. It's not in the regular vernacular, right? But you didn't write the book to uncover adoption trauma. It just sort of oozed out as a result of studying motherhood.
Yeah. I literally learned it while writing. I wrote the book because I was grieving. My sister had died. I wanted answers. I couldn't get answers about myself. I was so confused because everything I had been told growing up was now sort of crashing down. And I had just, I'm a historian and I have a doctorate in education history. So I was like, well, that was a comfort for me. Like I can get answers through history.
Yes. You try to make sense of things.
So I just started this journey of reading everything, not even to write a book. I just was like, I need to know, why can't I get my birth certificate?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah.
That was the first question. And so I unpacked that and I just went down this rabbit hole. And in the process, I learned, like you said in the opening, it is so complex.
Yep.
And I just had been sitting at the top of that iceberg my whole life.
Deeper.
I'm like, wow, there's so much here.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. And then a couple of years ago, Roe got overturned.
Yes.
And how does that impact who is a worthy mother and adoption and everything?
Yeah. So it just was what was happening in our nation. But I started reading everything I could in 2020. And I knew even before the reorganization of the Supreme Court, and we started to see as a nation, this was really a threat. Mm-hmm. Even before that, it was really clear to me in reading the history that at the root of all of this is fertility, right?
Okay.
Because that's where children come from, right?
Yes.
Children, at least right now, children grow in bodies. Right. And so fertility is the heart of it. It is the piece that also facilitates or dictates and shapes adoption transactions. Mm-hmm. And I also do want to share with my first daughter, I struggled with fertility. I have endometriosis. So I also was coming out of that, of 3 years of wondering, could I even have my own biological children?
Was adoption on your radar at all? Were you considering adoption if you couldn't get pregnant?
People kept saying, oh, you could just adopt. And there was something deep inside of me that was like, I don't feel good about that. And I think it's because I had so many of my own issues and traumas around adoption that I wasn't even aware of.
You didn't even know it. But when someone would suggest it, you're like, no. It doesn't feel right to me. Yeah.
I really, really wanted to have my own biological children because I didn't know anybody I was biologically related to. My two daughters are still the only two people I have ever met who I'm biologically related to.
Wow. I can't even imagine how that must feel for you adopted people that don't have other relatives. And so when you do have your own child, that just must blow your mind.
Yeah.
To have someone that, do they look like you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My younger daughter looks a lot like me, which is so crazy. It's so weird.
I've heard people that they totally take on their dad's characters. I'm like, dang it.
Yeah.
I still don't have anyone that looks like me. Oh, that's good that you have at least one that really looks like you. That's good.
Yeah.
She read the assignment. That's very good. Yeah. And back to the Roe piece and the Supreme Court and all that. I think there are 3 Supreme Court justices that are adoptive parents.
Yeah. Oh, 3? I know Amy Coney Barrett is.
Yes.
Who else? That's totally new to me.
There's 2 that were kind of casual, but Coney Barrett is the main one because she brags about it and tromps around.
Yeah, she speaks about it all the time. It is directly shaping her policy decisions.
Yeah. Okay, so Roberts, I think, adopted a nephew or something like that. And then Thomas is also some sort of kinship adoptive parent.
Wow.
Yeah, so Roberts, Thomas, and Barrett.
I didn't even know that Clarence Thomas was a parent. I didn't think he had children.
Yeah. So you wonder, okay, how much did that come into play with some of these decisions? And
it totally did. Like, that's one thing I learned about the policies, the evolution of adoption policy is it is heavily shaped by the adopting community. And when it's just the way power operates, right?
Yeah. Where's the money? Yeah. Follow the money.
Yeah. And your identity. If you're an adoptive parent and you have a seat at the table, you're a legislator, right? Or you're a judge, or you're an attorney, you have more power to shape policy, right?
Sure. Yeah, we need to get more adoptees on those places, I tell you.
And those are the people who are changing policy, are adoptees who are now in state legislatures.
Yes.
They are changing policy to open seal records and transform how adoption is done.
Yes. And you were born in California. It still boggles my mind how closed California is, of all places.
Yeah, there is a bill in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. It got tabled or something recently, I think.
Did it get tabled? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah, I know.
It's so crazy.
It is. It is crazy. And it does seem like the birth certificate issue is nonpartisan. It doesn't reflect liberal or conservative. It just, whoever's at the table I don't understand that. I need to get more involved.
It's a paradigm. Yeah, it's a non-political party paradigm. And the paradigm is adoption, carte blanche, is saving babies. And people who adopt are saviors. And there are so many nuances to that. You're an adoptive mom. And from what I hear, just what I've seen you doing as a parent with your son, I think your son's incredibly fortunate to have you, to have two amazing moms. So that's a reality, but that's not every case, And I think the paradigm that has shaped policy over the past 100+ years, it is only good. And we are saving babies. And there's a lot of racism in operation underneath that paradigm about who, again, going back to who is a worthy mother and who should be raising children, who should not be raising children. So it's complicated.
And classism too, yeah?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Because the women historically who've been targeted as unworthy and who've been literally had their babies stolen and been forcibly sterilized are women who are experiencing poverty, immigrant women, women of color, Indigenous women.
Yeah, I was disturbed by many things that you uncover in the book, but one of the things that really struck me was a section about eugenics and forced sterilizations. And the North Carolina sterilization program, I had never heard of that before.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounded like a dystopian nightmare. I'm like, is this really true? And it went on until 2007 or something, something really, really recent.
Yeah.
Can you help our listeners understand a little bit more about that part of our history?
And every state in our country has had a eugenics policy, a eugenics, inspired policy.
Yeah.
So eugenics is a pseudoscience. It has been totally debunked, and it's a pseudoscience that's totally steeped in racism. And it says there are certain genetics that are better than other genetics, right? And it's like the Western white European genes are stronger, better, more intelligent than basically all other genetic bloodlines, which is ridiculous. It's
horrible. That's
wrong. It's horrible. It's bigoted. But there were people at Stanford and the greatest institutions in our country who were outward eugenicists and were shaping policy in education, in social welfare based on this belief.
And women were sterilized against their will.
Yeah.
Thousands of them.
So a lot of what was sort of an outcome of this eugenics philosophy was you could use it to tackle poverty, right? And so the thought process was you go into communities that were really struggling, that had been deprived of resources. They were experiencing destitute poverty, not because the people were incapable of working and thinking and creating, but because they had been just decimated for Indigenous communities by really oppressive colonial projects. And so you go into these communities like reservations, and the thought was if we stop women from having babies, then there won't be more people in the community that will sort of facilitate poverty, right? You can't let a poor woman raise a baby. So we have to make sure that there aren't women having babies on the reservations. And that literally was the policy in the 1960s and 70s in our country.
Oh, it just hurts my heart so bad. Like instead of seeing these women in poverty, how about helping them get out of poverty? I don't know. It seems sort of radical.
Yeah. And especially for mothers, women who are pregnant or have little ones, let's provide resources to support them.
Those are the ones that need the help.
Because we all know raising children, it takes a lot of support and it takes a lot of resources.
Yes.
But the insane part of that was instead of supporting them, it's let's just prevent them from having babies. Or let's take the babies.
Take the babies, maybe do both. Yeah. Oh, God. It's so heartbreaking. I bet this book was hard. You had to really dig into some really ugly stuff in our country's history, culture. How did you do that? How did you get through it every day living in this material?
I kind of have been living there for a while with my work academically. My doctoral research is on student resistance to assimilation education in the progressive era. So I look at off-reservation Indian boarding schools. So I've done a lot of reading and research about the impacts of assimilation education in Indigenous communities in the United States. And that's horrific. It's a horrific history that I really think needs to be centered and taught and understood. but I am white. I know that much from my adoption. I'm not Native. I'm not an Indigenous person. So I could read about it with some distance, right? This is what allows us to sort of dehumanize people's trauma and traumatic experiences. And I don't want to dehumanize the experiences of Indigenous communities, because we all need to be really aware of these histories. But, I could disassociate to a certain degree, but reading this history as an adoptee was devastating for me. And I know and work with a lot of Native scholars and Native historians who, for them to do their work, it's devastating because they're reading about their families and their communities. And so for me, for the first time, I'm like, oh my God, this is my history. And yeah, it made me really angry.
I bet.
Really, really angry. Yeah. That I didn't know about this as an adoptee.
Yes. And no one knows, you pulled out some stuff that I'd never heard of before. And I feel like I know, I don't know, I do pretty good on Jeopardy. I kind of know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, you dug into some stuff that's really ugly history. So we have to learn from it. And I'm so glad you wrote the book and spent that time digging through this stuff, because we need to be aware of it, because we are continuing to repeat some of these same patterns.
Yeah, I think especially, I finished the book when Dobbs passed.
Okay.
And we're now heading into this space where we are beginning to repeat those patterns, especially now in the post-Roe era.
Yeah. Can you pull out one thing that you would really like our listeners to understand about your book or about mothering? What's one thing you think people are not getting out of the general mass media that you would like them to understand?
I think it's really important at this moment for us in our society to understand that we collectively and continuously, in every little micro level ways and macro level ways, differentially value mothers in America. And we are still making decisions that are rooted in really bigoted assumptions, that are rooted in racism, and that are rooted in homophobia and transphobia and classism. And they all come together to make really, really damaging value judgments about who's valued, right? Who's a valued parent, who's a worthy parent, and who is a valued child. And there have been so many amazing people ringing this bell for a long time. And I think we as a nation really need to wake up. And I think the way to do that is to look back and understand the history, right?
Yes, definitely. Well, I don't think anyone has ever put this together in the way you have, with just like everything about mothers all in one book. I think it's really, really unique. And also from your adoption lens, I think you provide a really unique way of looking at all of these complex issues. And I encourage everyone to go get your book, Who is a Worthy Mother? And is there anything else you'd like to say that I haven't asked you about?
I would love to put a plug in and ask people to write reviews.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Oh, I'll go do that myself.
I would love that. I'm really, whatever they want to say, 2 stars, 1 star, 5 stars. I don't care. On Amazon and Goodreads, it really makes a difference getting the story out there.
Okay, but we like 5 stars better.
Yeah, so. Of course I would love 5 stars.
But just more reviews, more people taking the time to go.
Yeah. And please read it and share it. And if people have book clubs, it's turning into a pretty cool book club book. Yeah. I've been getting a bunch of requests from different book clubs to talk. So that's really exciting.
Important stuff. Well, thank you for writing the book, and thank you for being on and sharing your book and yourself with our audience. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Well, after you go look up Becca's book through the link in the show notes, which you can find either below or next to your podcast app's display of the episode cover, I invite you to go check out unravelingadoption.com. There's lots of information there about all the things that we do. And if any of you are looking for more ways to help out Unraveling Adoption, I encourage you to become a Patreon member. For as little as $5 a month, you can support our mission and help defray the costs of creating this podcast and the other free resources that we create. And as a bonus to our Patreon supporters, we offer early episode releases, 50% off live events, and access to our new Adoption on Screen database, which is a list of movies and TV shows that have anything to do with adoption. So you can go look it up ahead of time so you don't get blindsided or triggered, you or your kids. If you want to join our Patreon, just go to patreon.com/unraveling Unraveling Adoption. And thank you to all the wonderful Patreon supporters that have been so loyal and supportive of our efforts. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure and share this episode with any mothers you know, or any historians you know, any scholars you know that might want to dig deeper into this, anyone who loves reading wonderful books, and anyone impacted by adoption or mothering in any way, which is everybody. Everyone's affected by mothering, right? Somehow.
Yes.
So share this episode and get Becca's voice out there further. And thank you all for listening. Becca and I want you all to stay
safe.